Courting by James K. White. Mystery of the Sea by Bram Stoker. Chapter 33. Don Bernardino. The stranger held himself with, if possible, greater hauteur, as he answered, "I have that great honor." "And I, sir," said Marjorie, with a pride rivaling his own, "am an American." Issue was joined. For a period which from its strain seemed very long, though it was probably but a few seconds, they stood facing each other, types of the two races whose deadly contest was then the interest of the world. The time was, at any rate, sufficiently long for me to consider the situation, and to admire the types. It would have been hard to get a better representative of either, of the Latin as well as of the Anglo-Saxon. Don Bernardino, with his high aquiline nose and black eyes of eagle keenness, his proud bearing and the very swarthiness which told of Moorish descent, was, despite his modern clothes, just such a picture as Velasquez would have loved to paint, or as Fortuny might have made to live again. And Marjorie, she looked like the spirit of her free race incarnate, the boldness of her pose, her free bearing, her manifest courage and self-belief, the absence of either prudery or self-consciousness, her picturesque noble beauty, as with set white face and flashing eyes she faced the enemy of her country, made a vision never to be forgotten. Even her racial enemy had unconsciously to fall into admiration. And through it, the dominance of his masculine nature spoke. His words were gracious, and the easy gracefulness of their delivery was no less marked because the calm was forced. Our nations, alas, Senora, are at war. But surely not even the courtesies of the battlefield need be strained when individuals, even of the most loyal, each to their own, meet on neutral soil. It was evident that even Marjorie's quick wit did not grasp at a suitable reply. The forgiveness of enemies is not the strong point of any woman's nature, or of her education. The only remark she made was to again repeat, "I am an American." The Spaniard felt the strength of his position. Again his masculinity came out in his reply. "And all good women, as well as all good men, should be loyal to their flag. But oh, Senora, before even your nationality comes your sex. The Spanish nation does not make war on women." He seemed really to believe what he said, for the proud light in his face could not have been to either a distard or a liar. I confess it was with a shock that I heard Marjorie's words. In the Reconcentrados were as many women as men. More, for the men were fighting elsewhere. The passionate, disdainful sneer on her lips gave emphasis to the insult, and blood followed the stab. A red tide rushed to the Spaniard's swarthy face, over forehead and ears and neck, till in a moment of quick passion of hate he seemed as if bathed in red light. And then, in truth, I saw the very man of my vision at Whinnyfold. Marjorie, womanlike, feeling her superiority over the man's anger, went on mercilessly. Women and children herded together like beasts, beaten, starved, tortured, mocked at, shamed, murdered. Oh, it is a proud thought for a Spaniard, that when the men cannot be conquered, even in half a century of furious oppression, their baffled foes can wreak their vengeance on the helpless women and children. The Spaniard's red became white, a deathly pallor which looked grey in the darkened room. With his coldness came the force of coldness, self-command. I had a feeling that in those few moments of change had come to him some grim purpose of revenge. It was borne in upon me by flashes of memory and instinct that the man was of the race and class from which came the rulers and oppressors of the land, the leaders of the Inquisition. Eyes like his own, burning in faces of deathly white, looked on deeds of torture whose very memory after centuries can appall the world. But with all his passion of hate and shame, he never lost the instinct of his dignity, or his grace of manner. One could not but feel that even when he struck to kill, he would strike with easeful grace. Something of the feeling was in his speech, perhaps in the manner rather than the words, when after a pause he said, "For such foul acts I have naught but indignation and grief, though in the history of a nation such things must be. It is the soldier's duty to obey, even though his heart revolt. I have memory of hearing that even your own great nation has exercised not so much care as might be." How he sneered with polished sarcasm as he turned the phrase. "In the dealing with Indians. Nay, more. Even in your great war, when to kill was fratricidal, there were hardships to be conquered, even to the helpless women and children. Have I not heard that one of your most honored generals, being asked what was to become of the women in a great march of devastation that he was about to make, replied, 'The women? I would leave them nothing but their eyes to weep with.' But indeed, I grieve that in this our mutual war, the Senora grieves. Is it that she has suffered in herself, or through others dear to her?" Marjory's eyes flashed. Pulling herself to full height, she said proudly, "Sir, I am not one who whines for pain of my own. I and mine know how to bear our own troubles, as our ancestors did before us. We do not bend before Spain, no more today than when my great ancestors swept the Spaniards from the western main, till the seas were lit with blazing masts and the shores were fringed with wreckage. We Americans are not the stuff of which you make reconcentrados. We can die. As for me, the 300 years that have passed without war are as a dream. I look on Spain and the Spaniard with the eyes and feel with the heart of my great-uncle Francis Drake." While she was speaking, Don Bernardino was cooling down. He was still deadly pale, and his eyes had something of the hollow glare of phosphorus in the sockets of a skull. But he was master of himself, and it seemed to me that he was straining every nerve to recover, for some purpose of his own, his lost ground. It may have been that he was ashamed of his burst of passion, with and before a woman. But anyhow, he was manifestly set on maintaining calm, or the appearance of it. With the fullness of his grace and courtesy, he said, turning to Mrs. Jack, "I thank you for the permission so graciously granted to me to visit again this my house. You will permit me, however, I hope without any intention of offence, to withdraw from where my presence has brought so much of disturbance, the which I deplore, and for which I crave pardon." To me he bowed stiffly with a sort of lofty condescension, and finally looking towards Marjory, he said, "The Senora will, I trust, believe that even a Spaniard may have pity to give pain, and that there are duties which gentlemen must observe because they are gentlemen, and because they reverence the trust that is reposed in them more than do common men. She can appreciate the call of duty, I know, for she can be none other than the new patriot who restores in the West our glorious memories of the Maid of Saragossa. I pray that the time may come when she shall understand these things, and believe." Then, with a bow which seemed the embodiment of old-fashioned grace and courtesy, he bent almost to the ground. Marjory instinctively bowed. Her training as to good manners here stood her in good stead. Not even patriotic enthusiasm can at times break the icy barrier of social decorum. When the Spaniard left the room, which he did with long strides, but bearing himself with inconceivable haughtiness, Mrs. Jack, with a glance at us, went with him. Instinctively I started to take her place, in the first instance to relieve her from an awkward duty, and beyond this with a feeling that I was not quite satisfied with him. No one could be in antagonism with Marjory, and acquire or retain my good will. As I moved, Marjory held up her hand and whispered to me to stay. I did so, and waited for her to explain. She listened intently to the retreating footsteps. When we heard the echoing sound of the closing of the heavy outer door, she breathed freely and said to me with relief in her voice, "I know you two would have fought if you had got alone together just now." I smiled, for I was just beginning to understand that that was just how I felt. Marjorie remained standing at the table, and I could see that she was buried in thought. Presently she said, "I felt it was cruel to say such things to that gentleman. Oh, but he is a gentleman. The old idea seems embodied in him. Such pride, such haughtiness, such disdain for the commoner kind, such adherence to ideas, such devotion to honor. Indeed, I felt it very cruel and ungenerous. But I had nothing else to do. I had to make him angry, and I knew he couldn't quarrel with me. Nothing else would have taken us all away from the cipher." Her words gave me quite a shock. "Do you mean to say, Marjorie," I asked, "that you were acting a part all the time?" "I don't know," she answered pensively. "I meant every word I said, even when it hurt him most. I suppose that was the American in me. And yet all the time I had a purpose or a motive of my own which prompted me. I suppose that was the woman in me." "And what was the motive or purpose?" I asked again, for I wondered. "I don't know," she said naively. I felt that she was concealing something from me, but that it was a something so tender or so deep in her heart that its very concealment was a shy compliment. So I smiled happily as I said, "And that is the girl in you. The girl that is American, and European, and Asiatic, and African, and Polynesian. The girl straight out of the Garden of Eden, with the fragrance of God's own breath in her mouth. Darling," she said, looking at me lovingly. That was all. During the day we discussed the visitor of the morning. Mrs. Jack said very little, but now and again implored Marjorie to be cautious. When she was asked her reason for the warning, her only reply was, "I don't like a man who can look like that. I don't know which is worst, when he is hot or cold." I gathered that Marjorie, in the main, agreed with her, but did not feel the same concern. Marjorie would have been concerned if the danger had been to anyone else, but she was not habituated to be anxious about herself. Besides, she was young, and the antagonist was a man, and haughty and handsome and interesting. In the afternoon we completed our arrangements for the visit to the treasure cave. We both felt the necessity for pressing on this matter, since the existence of the secret writing was known to Don Bernardino. He had not hesitated to speak openly, though he did not know, of course, the extent of our own knowledge of the subject, of a grave duty which he had undertaken from hereditary motives, or of the tragic consequences which might ensue. It was whilst we were speaking of the possibility of his being able to decipher the cryptogram that Marjorie suddenly said, "Did you understand exactly why I asked you to give him the paper at once?" "Far be it from me," I answered, "to profess to understand exactly the motives of any charming woman." "Not even when she tells you herself?" "Ah, then the real mystery only begins," I said, bowing. She smiled as she replied, "You and I are both fond of mysteries, so I had better tell you at once. That man doesn't know the secret, I am sure of it. He knows there is a secret, and he knows a part, but only a part. That eager look wouldn't have been in his eye if he had known already. I dare say there is, somewhere, some duplicate of what the original Don Bernardino put down in his story. And of course there must be some allusion to the treasure in the secret records at Simancas, or the Quirinal, or the Vatican. Neither the kings of Spain nor the popes would let such a treasure pass out of mind. Indeed, it is possible that there is some key or clue to it which he holds. Did you notice how he referred at once to the secret meaning of the memorandum in the beginning of the law book? If we had not given it up at once, he would have forced on the question, and wished to take the paper away, and we could not have refused without letting him know something by our very refusal. Do you understand any more of my meaning now? And can you forgive me any more for my ill-mannered outbreak? That is what I am most sorry for, of all that has been in the interview today. Is that also any more light to you on the mystery of a woman's mind? It is you, dear. It is, I said, as I took her for a moment in my arms. She came easily and lovingly to me, and I could not but be assured that the yielding even momentarily to tenderness helped to ease the strain which had been bearing upon her for so long. For my Marjorie, though a strong and brave one, was but a woman after all. At 6 o'clock I took my way back to Whinnyfold, for I wanted to have all ready for our enterprise, and take full advantage of the ebb tide. We arranged that on this occasion Marjorie should come alone to join me at the house, our house. End of section 33. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.